Hello everyone and welcome to the Grumpy Surfer podcast. I'm the Grumpy Surfer and your host, Ads Lyson. I've had a few weeks off, so let's smash straight back into it. As usual, before we start, if you're looking to improve your surfing, go to ombe.co and have a look at their programs. And if you use the code OMBE, again, ombe.co/ref/grumpy surfer, you can get 10% off the programs. They're amazing. I'm still using them. And it really breaks down a beginner and intermediate surfing and advanced surfers surfing to make you better and do what you want to do in the water. So this fortnight's podcast is with a police officer in Bellevue, which is in the state of Washington, in the good old US of A. My guest also is a skateboarder, a brown belt in Brazilian Jiujitsu, and is very active on social media and has been for a while, showing how Jiu-Jitsu and combatives can really help with dealing with arrest and restraint. On top of that, he's using his skateboarding finesse to improve his community relations with the residents of Bellevue. I wanted to talk to Craig for a long time. I've been following him for a couple of years now. So please enjoy my conversation with a quality guy, Craig Hanaumi. Craig Hanaumi, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome, Ads. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
3 questions. How are you? Where are you? And what are you doing today?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm very good. It's a beautiful day today in Washington. And I have a day off today. So you're my whole focus right now. That's it. That's all I have planned.
So it's not Washington, D.C., which I got confused with. It's Bellevue, Washington State, over on the West Coast, right?
Correct. And that happens to, I'm from Hawaii originally. And before I moved up here, I had the same confusion. So you're not by yourself.
So a little bit about your background. We won't go into it too much, but you joined law enforcement. So you're a police officer in the US. You joined up in 2003 in Honolulu. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. Honolulu Police Department, 2003 for 3 years.
Nice. And what made you want to move from the island to the mainland?
A few variables. The one was cost of living plus salary. Of course, like many people who relocate to other places, my better half at that time, my ex wanted to relocate to the mainland, and after initially refusing, like many times in the relationship, the other person wins, right? So I had to relent and agree to move up here. So that was 16 years ago.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so you're kind of like a plastic mainlander now, right?
That's right. Yep. I settled in and no regrets. Worked out great.
So going in line with sort of like the whole premise of this podcast, are you a stereotypical Hawaiian that was into surfing when he was younger?
Well, it would fit in well with this podcast, but I actually wasn't. And people are surprised when they hear, because I think people presume if you grew up in Hawaii, you have to surf. But and my parents didn't surf. Where I lived in proximity to the beach was probably about a good 20-minute drive by a car. And if you didn't have a car, you'd have to catch the bus, which would take about closer to 45 minutes. And then you have to also have a surfboard. And since my parents didn't surf, they didn't get one for me. And it's quite expensive. I mean, I'm not a surfer, so I cannot say, but I remember just casually looking once at a store, and I was, even as a boy, I was like, man, I don't think I could afford this one. But so skateboarding was my thing. I had the closest comparison, which was on 4 wheels on blacktop and asphalt. That was my hobby back then.
It's to be fair, skateboarding and surfing derive from the same thing, really, don't they?
A lot of parallels. I believe a surfer was credited with the first skateboard, if I'm not mistaken, back in the day.
Mate, I couldn't tell you. I've got no idea about the history, but I just, I've watched the surf films to understand that bit,
Yeah, for sure.
How did you find skating earlier on? Because you started when you were like early teenager, right?
I started when I was 10,
Oh,
19,
nice.
1985. I tell people all the time the movie Back to the Future was my first exposure to seeing skateboarding in, I guess, visually, and that hooked me. And then 86, 87, there's a bunch of videos that came out from a skateboard company called Powell Peralta, which is credited with formulating a group of guys called the Bones Brigade. And the Bones Brigade included people which people recognize from just as just household names now, like Tony Hawk. There's these four other guys: Steve Caballero, Tommy Guerrero, Mike McGill, and Lance Mountain. And together they basically were like a boy band of skateboarding. And they would go to do demos and tour the world. And they came out with a bunch of, back then, VHS tapes and Betamax tapes, which I bought all of them, or my parents bought for me. And that was kind of like the beginning of the skateboarding kind of explosion from the underground to which would now be basically mainstream.
What were you more into, street, or were you into, the park skating, the bowls and the ramps and much like?
That's a good question. We didn't have any parks. So back in the 80s on Oahu, the closest thing to a park was a ditch, a storm drainage ditch for floods. And when there's no water in those, they're the closest thing to having a bowl. Some were even shaped like kind of like a bowl, but there was no actual skateboard parks. There was roller skate places, but so I'd say street. There's schools, businesses, and places where you're not supposed to skateboard were our skate parks. And I don't even know when the first park was built on Oahu, but it was not until quite some time later. So all we had was the environment, and I think that's how skateboarders kind of like it. Like you look at something and be like, how can I skate that? And then you end up trying to figure out ways to skate it. So yeah, that's not spoiled like on the mainland. Like over here, there's parks everywhere. We're lucky. Skaters are lucky nowadays to have so much access to good stuff to skate.
And not a lot many people know this from listening to this podcast, but I'm from sort of like the Midlands originally, like in the middle of the UK, next to Birmingham. And I started surfing when I was about 13, 14 years old. But because I was landlocked and before I could drive, I was quite heavily into skating, but I wasn't particularly that good. And when I was at school, one of my what we call the GCSE, so I don't know what your equivalent would be like when you come to the end of school. My my design technology project was to make just a ramp, and it was out of angle iron and some plywood. It was the heaviest piece of shit you've ever fucking seen in your life, and I made it with on a hinge so you could adjust the height of it. But honestly, it must have weighed about 30 kilos to carry it around. It was so heavy.
You have to put it on your board to push it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it would have snapped the board in half. I think it had like a weight restriction,
Yeah. That's
But
those. Was it a transition or was it a bank? Was it a?
it was just a transition. So basically, it was just like an A-frame.
Got it.
It had
Yeah.
like a little bit of a lead up ramp to it, so like you
Yeah.
didn't hit your front truck on it and just go flying forwards. But yeah, after I'd finished doing that, I was this is when I stopped skateboarding, and there's a good reason why. Is I was just practicing ollieing up a curb, and I stamped on the back, and it flicked up and hit me right between the legs in my coccyx. And honestly, I was in the absolute hurt locker for about 2 weeks after that. I was just pissing razor blades. It was horrendous.
Yeah, that's the time to retire or take a break, maybe. Take a break from that.
Yeah, but from like the skate scene back in around then. So we're talking like early 90s, sort of like early 90s, mid 90s. I was very similar to you. You know, all my surfing films came from VHS and Betamax
Yeah.
videotapes. I had a few snowboarding videos as well, and a few skateboarding videos. So all my technique and my knowledge of how to do tricks, you know, no one around where I lived skated,
Yeah.
and it was really difficult. I was literally like trying to teach myself how to do things, and you try and teach yourself how to ollie, let alone kickflip, when no
Ooh.
one's shown you how to do it.
Yeah.
It's a hard technique to just master on its own.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a disadvantage when you don't have in person or coaching of any kind, right? I think that's the good and the bad part about it. I think like any individual activity, the bad part is if you have no one else, you have to self-teach, which can take much longer. But I think the neat thing about that is, I mean, with references from magazine or video, it's still possible. And I think that's where the aspect of those activities are so interesting to people that enjoy them, because there's a lot of independence about it. It's not like a organized group, or it's just you, right? And you can do it by yourself or with other people. But I think the self-discovery is kind of that's a neat thing about any of those, like surfing, skateboarding, snowboarding, right? You're in control of that yourself, and you're in control of the pace too, right? You can learn as slow as you want. You can try to condense it, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was so drawn to it, is because it was, whether I succeeded or failed, it was all my fault, you know.
So you mentioned you come from Hawaii originally. Martial arts is quite a prevalent thing within the islands itself.
Yes.
You know, was that something that you were interested in early on, or was it just skating?
Oh no, come on. I don't know how it is to grow up in other countries, right? But as a boy in Hawaii, which is lots of, like you said, influence from a lot of the different countries of Asia, all the immigrants. Martial arts is was a big part of my childhood. I don't know if it was because I just like the movies or wanted to be like a ninja. Just, I don't know what, if that's a universal thing. I don't know. I feel like I don't think that's uncommon to go to another place and may not be called a ninja, but just being some kind of like action figure kind of persona, right? You try to like, well, how can I do that? Like, what are the things I need to become that? And martial arts is definitely one. And I was lucky. My parents let me try a lot of different things. They allowed me to kind of go with my interest, and I got to try a lot of different things. And in my mind, I don't know if they realized, but in my mind, I was just thinking like a little checkbox, a list. I was like, okay, I have some karate, I can check that one. I have some, whatever else, kung fu I did a little while. And I was thinking in my brain, well, this is the steps I need to get to be a ninja. That was the little process in my brain. And I just needed a couple ones with weapons, but I didn't stick with any of them for extended periods of time. I think right about the time when I would have probably gotten decent at them, the skateboarding took over. So that was my main focus for the next couple of years after that.
I always found traditional martial arts, like you're talking about, your karates, your taekwondos, even kung fu and judo. For me, they were all very formal.
Yeah.
So and they never really related to me that much. So I did them all in a YMCA sort of like setting, like a youth setting.
Yeah.
And I did karate for a little bit, but my mum stopped me from doing it because I was kicking kids at school. I'm talking like at quite a young age here. It wasn't like, I mean, when I started doing jiu-jitsu, much like yourself, I was like, in my early 30s.
Yeah.
And it was only because I did it off the back of when the waves weren't good in this country, which is, quite often. I was sick of going to the gym and doing the same old gym routines.
Sure.
I wanted something different to do, and it just so happened the gym that I was working in at the time, a guy turned up who was a purple belt, black belt in judo, purple belt in jiu-jitsu. Just said, let's get some mats and start training. And that's kind of how I started like 9 years ago, was kind of through that transition. And I think the informal way that jiu-jitsu comes across and is taught, and how I teach, really related to me quite a lot. And I think that's why people find it quite addictive and stick with it.
Oh, for sure. I think everybody is different, and like the formality of martial arts is definitely for some people turn off. They don't like that, and I especially think that it would be very different from other activities that are typically paired with jiu-jitsu, like surfing and skateboarding, and all these sports or these activities that are not formalized instruction, right? Because it's almost like the opposite of what a person would be looking for if they wanted to do something that didn't have like a traditional kind of learning style. And if you enjoy the non-traditional learning style, yeah, you would definitely be turned off by a sit down, listen to the teacher kind of scenario.
Yeah, I get that a lot, especially when I'm teaching my students now. One of the main things that came up was the fact that they were quite scared to come into my school,
Yeah.
and because they'd YouTube loads of things on YouTube and read loads of articles on the internet, and I think they were kind of quite scared
Yeah.
about starting something like that. I mean, one of the guys did judo when he was younger, and he very much was in that formality kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like, he didn't know whether, does he come in and does he bow to go on the mat? Does he call you sensei or professor? And I was like, that. Hello, mate. How you doing? My name's Ads. Just come and put your gear on, and we're going to do some training and stuff. That was pretty much it.
Yeah.
But it also comes to how you come across as an instructor, and how you are when you're teaching as well. And to how people relate and how they learn off you too.
Yes. Yeah. Everybody's different. Some people enjoy the formalized setting, and some people don't. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's always a way to balance it in between. It doesn't have to be, there is value to having class that if you start at whatever the time that it says on the paper, then you actually start at that time. Like it's definitely a balance between both of them. And but yeah, there's a draw to having a relaxed, because the activity, like you said, is very, somebody who never did it before would find it very intimidating to start. If it was, and a formalized setting may make it even more intimidating, so I think that definitely.
I think one of the things that also kind of puts a stereotype into it as well is, like, these days, the UFC, MMA is very prevalent in the media. And one of the parts of mixed martial arts is ground fighting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try and do is, and I've even now, I'm going to ask you this in a minute.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult, is trying to explain somebody what jiu-jitsu is without it sounding like super barbaric.
Sure.
Because when you tell somebody that it is, ground fighting, you take somebody down, you're pinning them to the floor, submissions, chokes, leg locks, lots and lots of
Mm-hmm.
different things, they go, oh my God. And especially when, like, they're asking about, the kids as well. But then
Sure.
trying to throw into that as well, it's really good for body contact.
Yeah.
You learn about movement patterns and all that sort of thing. That's actually really helpful to self-defense as well.
Yeah.
You can't throw it into like a 30-second, pitch. So
Yeah.
this is what I'm going to do to you. What would your 30-second pitch be to somebody asking what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is?
Good. That's a hard one. Yeah. Good question. I think I would say it's a form of self-defense that allows you to be able to control a person using body weight and body positioning without hurting them unless you wanted to. And with no punch, no strikes, right? No, without hitting somebody, being able to control and have somebody under control without needing to hurt them, unless they give you a reason to, or unless you chose to do so. So a scalable form of self-defense.
It's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard
Yeah.
to do without throwing lots of words into it to explain it.
Not easy.
So how did you get yourself into it? What was the draw for jiu-jitsu for you?
Well, for me, it was work related. I mean, I always wanted to, like I said, from the time I was a kid, right? I wanted to be like a ninja, but I kind of grew out of that. But then when I started going into my current field of law enforcement, you clearly would benefit with some kind of way to protect yourself and obviously potentially protect another person. And I'm not a big person, physically. So of course the need to have some kind of technique is more important. And from that, I just started searching online I typed in police and jiu-jitsu. And one of the courses that came up, or one of the search things that came up, was the course that Rener and Ryron Gracie, they teach in Torrance, called the Gracie Survival Tactics course. And I saw that it was called something else at that time. But I saw there was a week-long course that they had. And I thought that was super interesting. So I actually put a request in our training unit to attend it. And this was in 2008, and it got approved. So I got to go to Southern California for a week to train with a bunch of other officers from all over the world. And I got to learn from those brothers, and that was my first official exposure to the art, and it was great. I mean, it was probably the best scenario to start off with just kind of like a summary of the art, what it could potentially do, and I was hooked after that. It was exactly what I expected, which was just a kind of an overall summary of what can be done, what is possible, and that just got me hooked right away.
So where do you train out of where you are now?
I don't have a home gym right now, so I split time at our station. Our station has about a 800 square foot mat space. And that's where I just bring in people. I invite close friends or people in the community who I know do jiu-jitsu. Couple coworkers. We have a handful of coworkers who train. Friends of mine who actually started skateboarding, or I met through skateboarding, who are now kind of old people, like in their 20s, late teens, and I invite them to. They wanted to try jiu-jitsu, and between that and once in a great while, because of my schedule, I cannot consistently go, but we have a gym right up the road from our station, about 5 minutes, called 10 Planet Seattle, which is in Bellevue. And that's run by a guy named Nathan Orchard, who is one of the 10 Planet active black belt competitors. And he asked 2.5 weeks ago, he was just up in the UK for the Polaris.
Yeah, I went to watch it.
Yeah, he's such a his jiu-jitsu is so fun to watch. It's and he's a very nice guy, and he's a great teacher too. So I learned a lot from he's of course Nogi, right? Their stuff is all Nogi, and I just started doing that after he moved to our state about 3 years ago from Oregon. And then he ended up just being right. He set up his school right like 5 minutes from our station. And up until that time, I was primarily a gi person. And so that was like, I felt like that was the sign I needed to get out of my comfort zone. Because if I wasn't going to start doing no gi from Nathan, I mean, like, what other way, I'm not going to learn from one of the best guys, then there's not going to be another person that's going to convince me, I don't think, to try it out. So
do you find that you're kind of the local coach then, for your area when you're working? Because when I was when I was in the Marines, pretty much every single lunchtime there was a group of us that got together on the mat, and
Mm.
I was quite in a fortunate position for the second half of my career, being a PTI in the Marines. I was able to set up gyms and matted areas and be able to take guys on the mat and coach them all the way from blue belt all the way up to
Yeah,
up to where I am as a brown belt, which was cool because when you went to classes, you used to be able to take that information away with you and then put that forward to other people as well, which I always found quite useful.
that's the best part of the art. I feel like the art is great because of obviously the fun of it and the ability to protect yourself and the exercise. I mean, those are all good reasons, but I feel like the best part of the art is being able to share with somebody else. And then the I mean, that's whatever group it is. I mean, we've been recently, our department, they gave me the green light to start to do some outreach with jujitsu to do self-defense classes for women and free, through our department, kind of coordinating. And we actually hosted one at Nathan's gym last month, and we had 110 women show up for that. And we have another one. Luckily, again, Nathan letting us use his gym again in a week. And I don't know how much people is going to go, but I mean, it's like a win for everybody. The department looks good. The community, the people attending really appreciate it. And I mean, it's a fun thing to do, right? Like teaching is like it's a piece of the whole thing. I mean, if you don't have to do it, but I mean, I feel like that makes you better at explaining something, makes you better at performing it.
Well,
And
you have to break down what you do as an individual. You have to break down those components, and then, using vocabulary, you have to describe what it is and what you're feeling. And one of the key things that I learned over the years of being a coach and going to other classes is by learning from those professors and their way that they teach. There's some people, I mean, yourself, there's some people that you learn are far more and you relate to than other people because, you kind of have that connection with them. When I'm coaching, I always try and tie those little bits in that I've learnt off those people.
yeah,
And then while I'm coaching, I'm also thinking about what I'm doing. So I try and really piecemeal put things together about, right, this is the technique, but within that technique, there are other techniques like your pressure, where you put your toes, little details about where you put your hands, because it's quite easy just to teach a technique and go, right, go away and learn it. And then people really don't get anything out of that. So you're kind of learning yourself while you're doing it.
yes, yeah, 100%. And they complement that. The teaching complements the performance, and vice versa. I think, but they're two independent skills, right? Like, because you can be a high level practitioner but not be a good teacher, and then you can be the reverse. You can be like an okay practitioner but a really good teacher. So I mean, you have to focus whatever the piece of it is. If you don't have the investment and time into that piece, it's just not going to be as good. And they're not. It does not mean you are good at one that you're automatically good at the other one, for sure.
How do you find the correlation with putting combatives into police training? Because I use an example from being in the Marines. I spent a long time. We have a syllabus, or we have a syllabus. I'm trying to use the past and close tense because I'm not in anymore. There is a syllabus. There we go. Of teaching unarmed combat, which is taken lots of pieces from boxing, basically like MMA, but put like you do. You train with your gear on, right? But the way that it is portrayed and put across to the trained ranks within the Royal Marines is that they probably do like 1 or 2 sessions a year,
Mm-hmm.
and then when they go and do room entries or any sort of like close combative work, they struggle because they haven't got that interpersonal training where they're doing it a couple of times a week to retain that information, because yourself with jiu-jitsu, you can't go once a month and then be um, be able to put that into practice properly. You need to
Mhm.
be going once, 2, 3 times a week to even retain that information, let alone those motor neurons automatically put that process while you're in a live situation. What is it like within the US Police Department? Do you have training each week that's set aside for things like that?
That's a good question. And the answer is every place is different. Every department, every state is different, every city is different, and every department within each state is different. And because of size of the agency, that affects things like what kind of scheduling, affects things like the staffing and coverage of a department, and that affects the ability to train. And then you add on top of that the budget, and you add on top of that the ability of the training cadre. And so there's all these variables that when you put them all together, that it's not surprising how much variance there is, because of all the different pieces that need to go into place and to make a good training. So my answer would not even be able to represent the police departments in the United States. Like, my answer would represent our city's police department, and that's it. And the only two I could probably speak on with accuracy is the places that I've worked, because, like I said, every department is different. So I think the transference of the skill set. I mean, if you look at what jujitsu, a piece of what jujitsu is control, and I mean that piece directly translates to what our job is. A piece of our job is potentially having to physically control somebody. So that is directly, anything connected to doing that is directly applicable. And then, I mean, the submission part, that's, the goal is not submission, right? If you're talking about what is the point of the control, is to gain control, to take into custody. So that kind of diverts, right, from what us the typical, I guess, answer would be in a jiu-jitsu context. But up until that part, just that control piece alone, I mean, that's a huge piece. And then the other side of that would be the survival and escape, right? Which is connected to control, because if you don't have good control, you're going to be put in a position that is not favorable, and then you got to get out of it. And so those two pieces would be like the most immediately transferable. And then to me, the bonus is submission. Like, I mean, if you're doing a submission, you presume that you have a degree of control to at least begin that process. And so if you don't have that, you're not going to get to the submission anyway. So by that time, if there's any that are being taught, I think that's more of like a bonus. There's some places and some agencies before, they used to have some things inside of the policies and manuals that are allowed, like neck restraint, right? Like, or what we call the rear naked choke, right? That was in a lot of agencies. I guess, what is it called? Manuals or curriculum. But nowadays, for the most part, it seems like those kind of techniques are prohibited. So what you have left is you have the control piece, right? That's one of the, and some places, depending on what state, you can't even do that piece because of some rules about like where you can put body weight on. Like some states, you cannot put pressure on the what do they call it? The torso, or you basically can't do chest to chest control. And if you can't do that, then I don't know how else you can hold somebody down. But it's just really weird how those, there's a lot of policies and rules of engagement that different places make, that ironically make it harder to, it actually makes it more likely that a person could get hurt. either person, the officer or the person getting taken into custody. You remove you make rules that with the intent of trying to protect the person actually ironically makes it more likely they're going to get injured.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too unfamiliar, if I'm perfectly honest. I've got my own personal views on this as well, especially the police in this country, because, you know, we don't carry firearms like you guys do. They've got tasers and stuff now, but you watch some of the online videos of police officers trying to arrest people. It's shocking, like shocking. And one of the things I always remember about this is when I was a young Marine, you know, you always kind of think that because you're physically strong and, you know, you the job that you do, you know, you're a steely-eyed dealer of death, you know, you're trained with knives in your teeth and all that sort of thing. You know, you're a what we would call a nails person, or somebody that's quite hard, you know. But what it comes down to at the end of the day is people that fight when we used to, you know, when I did, it was more of a lucky punch more than anything. 9 times out of 10, you know, the classic cliche of what jiu-jitsu is, a fight ends up onto the floor.
Yeah.
You've got absolutely no control over that whatsoever. And it pains me even now I'm 3 months out after leaving. It just pains me to see that we still are not learning these lessons, and there are not these policies put in place where, you know, you must do a limited, you know, of career sort of like workshops per week, where you're at least trying twice a week for a bit of exercise in the morning or whatever you're doing for an hour, where you're practicing these sort of things. You know, even something like that it is helpful.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you've got these training objectives that people need to hit. And this is, you know, it's similar to you guys, as I would assume, to what it was when we left. You know, you've got to hit these markers so people can deploy, or they can do whatever they're going to do. And I just think, you know, things are, people are just missing something that could take 2 hours out of your working week to potentially, it's going to sound a little bit extreme, but save your life at the end of the day.
Yep. No, I agree 100%. Generally speaking, if you can use that term without, you know, being inaccurate, because it's hard to generalize anything, but I would say there's just because of a lot of reasons, over reliance on tools. And I mean, one of the reasons is because the skill set of an average officer is not going to be super high as far as the hand-to-hand stuff, the ability to control, because I mean, there's just not enough time to teach it a lot of times to become proficient at it, or there hasn't been enough time devoted to it. And realistically, right, the most efficient way to I guess address, or not efficient, but the shortest way to address a disparity in size or strength is not to train somebody up to be able to deal with them in a grappling match, right? Is like to give them a tool, like, and then taser was created to kind of neutralize the disparity, and you know, it's a different way to be able to gain control of a situation. I think the problem with that is it's not an all-encompassing tool, right? There's definitely not situations that there's situations that taser would not be a good tool to use in, and I think we get stuck because without an alternative, what else? You know, that person's not going to realistically go to something else like their hands if they don't have the comfort in being able to do that. So they'll defer to the tool, and I think the problem is not always an applicable scenario to use it. And I don't know. I mean, the answer sometimes when you mention that there's a bunch of boxes to check for training. That's the case for a lot of places, and a lot of the times the training that's probably the best is not even on there. It's not on the list, and a lot of times it's because there's not a person internally that is able to teach that. And then so the alternative, next best thing, right? Sometimes if the agency is going to try to do something to get the skill set for their officers, is they got to outsource that training to another entity, like a private school, a jiu-jitsu gym. And that would be great, and that's actually more realistic for smaller departments, because if you take 100-person department of officers, the likelihood of you having a black belt or even any belt in that agency is very low within the department. So you would have to find the expertise someplace else. And that's great that, that you can that does multiple things: partner with the community, build relationships with people who train, right, as well. That's a win for everybody. But it's hard because the training cannot be like, if your first exposure to, and if you're thinking from a lens of, okay, I need to do this for police work, right? I need to be able to control somebody as part of my job. And then you go to a jiu-jitsu class, and the first lesson they're teaching is, I don't know, guard passing. And it's like, okay, what does that have to do with being able to, I would have to have the understanding of being able to pass the legs. That's important. But like, how immediately important is that for the officer? And I would say super low, because like, if it was me, I'd be thinking to myself, well, if you're the top person, that's great. You're doing well. But what if you're the bottom person? That's how I would think. I'd be like, well, what if I'm stuck underneath somebody? Like, how do I deal with that? So sometimes the way of a typical jiu-jitsu school, the amount of time it takes to get to a thing that would be, oh, this is immediately relevant. Sometimes it could be like a month or 2 months, or it could be like, sometimes it might be half a year before something sticks out like, okay, this I can use. And I would include submissions into that. Because if the rules of engagement prohibits you from using things like a collar choke, triangle choke, rear naked choke, guillotine, like, all those submissions are amazing. But if you can't do any of them for a lens of police work, it's like, well, that's cool, but that's not applicable to me. So all those submissions that I just named, it'd be useless. Like, I can't do none of them. So if I can't do none of them, then, like, even though it's great to know what benefit is it going to be for me to immediately, and the answer is zero.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the community there as well. So I'm kind of digressing. I'm moving this conversation away a little bit. Your social media profile, and that is kind of tied in conjunction with the Bellevue Police Department. How were they when you started posting things about, skateboarding with the kids and all that sort of thing? How did they take that in the very beginning before they came on board with it?
That's a good question. Every department is different, and luckily for me, our agency has there's policies about everything nowadays for most places. If there isn't one, it will become one, because somebody can probably do something questionable about it, and then they'll have to create one, or another incident will happen someplace else, and people will ask, well, what's our policy on this? And if we don't have one, guess what? We're going to have to make one. For social media, luckily our agency is it puts the discretion on the individual officer, what they can post. So some places, or actually a lot of places, prohibit you from sharing anything in uniform at all publicly. So you can't post anything, any pictures or video of yourself in uniform. And the reason why people or departments have those, right, is because either a person in that department or some person connected to another agency posted or did something that was not questionable, right? And then it makes, of course, they're not just representing themselves; they represent the city, the agency, right? And so, in response to that, they say the response is a lot of times the reaction of, okay, well, nobody can post anything anymore. But luckily, ours is not like that, and it gives us discretion to do so. I just started sharing stuff because initially my friends would not be able to see any of the good interactions that are going on, because like most of the stuff that's happening that's shared is negative. And when I started sharing those, I started doing it just to show my friends like, hey, there's other interactions besides these negative things that's being shared, that's going on a regular basis. And I just started doing it to show them. Like I wasn't, I did it to showcase my personal interactions with people in our community. That's how that started.
Do you find by doing that, you're putting yourself out there? So when there are situations that you have to go and deal with, and you turn up, it can almost kind of like diffuse it a little bit, because obviously people in your community, I guess, would know who you are now through the things that you've been doing. You know, that you've had some press releases and stuff about, you know, about the interactions with all the kids and all that sort of thing. So, you know, in a way, has it kind of inadvertently helped you?
But that's not by accident. One of the values of having positive interactions and building relationships and rapport is that exact reason. I mean, once in a while, when we have to go into a situation to take custody of a person, I mean, it's a simple scenario. If you had to arrest somebody, would you rather have arrest a person that you have no rapport with, or somebody you have good rapport with? I mean, to me, it's clearly somebody that I have a good relationship with. And the byproduct of that is, if we have to eventually take somebody into custody like that, doesn't mean it's going to happen for sure, but there's less likely of a chance that force will be used at all if there's a relationship already in place. That's the byproduct of rapport and building those relationships. That's not the primary reason, but it does it clearly is a benefit to our officer. And, you know, if you go in any scenario you think of, almost, somebody in a barricaded situation, like, what is the first thing, if a person is in that kind of scenario, what is the first thing that is done besides set up a perimeter and make sure that there's no immediate other people in danger? What is the first thing to do in that one after you do all that?
I guess you're just looking to preserve life, aren't you, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, by isolating the person, right? They put themselves in a room and they're not coming out, right? So there's no other immediate threat inside the room with them. But after you contain that area and set up, like I said, perimeter, what's the next thing to do, right? If you get called to that, one of the next.
I guess you've just got dialogue with them, haven't you? You know,
Yeah.
you've got to talk about the situation.
That's the goal, right? And imagine if you already going into that, you already had that. Like, how much easier is that? I mean, it's a huge. I think the problem with that piece of our job, building relationships, is it's not a quantifiable thing. Like, how do you quantify, or how do you show that you're doing that on a Excel sheet? What does that even look like? Like, building positive relationships is not a thing that is. It's hard to tangibly articulate. It's not a data point. It's not a stat. Like, how do you create stats of positive relationships? Right? You can't even gauge. So if I build a relationship with a person in our community, was that one? Is that just like that doesn't completely encapsulate what that means, right? That could mean the difference between having to use force or not. And if that comes to that and there's no force being used, then I mean, clearly that was worth it, right? But the problem is the return of the investment in time is not always something that you can document like accurately, right? Because that takes how much, that takes a lot of time, and that's not easy to do when you don't have a lot of time. It's not even possible when you don't have time. But the return is the return of the investment that may not even be seen for like years. And I think that's the hardest part about it. Like the benefit is always there when you need a scenario to be resolved like that, but you have to be willing to accept that the investment in time in the beginning, which could be a significant amount, or it could be just a few minutes, right? Spread out over whatever many weeks or months, but there's no immediate return. right? Like if it's different from if you wrote a ticket or like took a report, because say, oh, one ticket, like, oh, there's 5 tickets or 10 reports. But how do you document and track positive engagement? That's really hard.
Yeah, that whole piece of, I guess, not having that like god life presence, or what you would call like being the alpha. You know, you can compartmentalize that inside of you and actually be like a nice person, you know, to somebody, you know, at the end of the day could be in distress mentally, or, you know, I mean, there's 1,000,000,000 different variables that you could use for examples. Um, but at the end of the day, you know, I think police officers are, especially in America, are quite demonized purely for the fact that, you know, you've social media and the media do kind of depict it that way. However, you know, I'm going to use you as an example, a positive role model within your local community, but not everybody within the police force is going to have the same personality as you do. You know, some
Yes.
people are going to have, you know, issues with dealing with people. You know, even if they get into become a police officer, you know, not everyone's got those personality traits where, you know, they can just talk to everybody, you know, and that's probably why it can come across as being aggressive, and then all of a sudden you're escalating a situation because, you know, you've not developed your own personal traits, I guess.
It's a dichotomy. I think that's the hardest part about our work, is it's balancing these two opposing approaches, because sometimes you have to be very direct and give like very almost come across, you have to be abrasive. Like, for example, if there's a collision that is blocking the roadway, and if there's a person that's directing traffic and a car is coming towards that area, and not, whatever reason, not recognizing, like, hey, there's a person that's saying to not go that direction, then you might have to yell at them. like that's for their own safety, right? Because if they go that way, they're gonna get into, they won't be able to go, and they might, they might get hurt. Same thing for a pedestrian, right? Walking towards the same unsafe. If you have a perimeter for a barricaded person that has like a firearm, you have to prevent people from going past that perimeter. And if somebody is going past the perimeter for whatever reason, because they're oblivious or not paying attention, they're gonna get yelled at, right? If you don't do it, they're gonna get hurt. So there has to be a balance, and knowing when to modulate like your approach. There, like you said, there's some people who are more comfortable talking to people, and some people who are not as good at it as it. And I would include myself in that group. I would include myself in the group that's not comfortable initially, like inherently being that way. But you know what made that more comfortable was the comfort, the peace of mind that I had, knowing that if something went wrong, I would be able to have a better chance of protecting myself. So the physical component of training helps out the non-physical steps or things that we have to do. I mean, I think that's a big piece that people who don't train don't understand. And I think because a lot of the hype, or a lot of the promotional, if there is going to be training, right, it's a non-physical stuff, very, very emphasizing the verbal de-escalation and verbal communication, right? That's I think a very prominent emphasis on, if you can provide training, or it should be that. And then my only counter to that, which you probably recognize, is that's great to do. However, if you don't have the physical component to be able to protect yourself, the verbal piece is not going to be as good, no matter what. I mean, you won't be as calm, you won't be as comfortable, and you won't be able to, it will be fake, right? It will be a artificial calm, because in the back of your mind, you're going to be like, I don't know what to do if something goes wrong, right?
Well,
And I think
it's the classic cliche of being uncomfortable, being comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, which is, you know, going back to what we're talking about, really, jiu-jitsu is
Yep.
is what that teaches you
Yep.
fundamentally.
Yeah. And yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
just kind of changing the subject just a little bit. Do you find using jiu-jitsu as sort of like your pastime and skateboarding, do you find that um, a mental anchor? Do you find that as like your, your escapism? Being in any kind of public service job, whether it's um, ambulance service, fire service, police force, armed forces. Um, you see some horrific and deal with some horrific situations. Um, I always found that surfing was my escapism, and now it's surfing and jiu-jitsu. Do you
Mhm.
find that similar to what you experience?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big promotional push in the United States to try to emphasize more stuff connected to health and wellness. And one of the reasons why is because one of the biggest killers of first responders of any kind, police, fire, um, probably even people that's working inside of ERs, emergency rooms, is suicide. And part of the reason why is because the nature of the work puts people repetitively in other people's worst points in their life over and over and over, right? Seeing the absolute worst case scenarios, sometimes by the same people repetitively. That's very, it's very exhausting to have to deal with sometimes. And I think the physical activity of anything is good, but specifically stuff that forces your mind to be focusing on the present, which is kind of like what yoga and other forms of meditation do, except without the physical piece. I mean, that's exactly what surfing is. That's what jujitsu is. That's what skateboarding is. That's what others, like playing a musical instrument. They all do the same thing in bringing your brain to focus on whatever is happening right in that moment, and that's it. Not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or in an hour, right? And it's just or what just happened before, right? It kind of it's interesting to hear people talk about other things because I don't do I should do, but I don't do like yoga or meditation. But when I hear the benefits and the the reasons why, it's the same reasons as those other activities, but minus the exercise and minus the fun. To me, like those things are enjoyable as well as being good to take a break from reality for a little bit. And I don't know, it's just active forms of being present, and having mindful meditation but with physical movement. It's just it's that's I feel like those are, I mean, to me the goal should be to do those things instead of just I think that's a great first step, to be aware of your breath and everything, like as a it's still in stillness. But I mean, if you can do that and at the same time get exercise, like why wouldn't you want to do that? I don't know, that's just my own personal take on those principles.
No, it's definitely a good way of putting it. I've as I've probably mentioned before in previous episodes, I've got into doing a little bit of meditating, and I don't mean like I don't want to sound this derogatory, but the hippie shit. I'm sat
Yeah.
there levitating,
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. But 10 minutes before I go to bed, I turn off all the lights. I just count
Yeah.
my breaths. I count my breathing for 10 minutes. It's pretty much it. And I found, with a bit of consistency, like training, you know, it has had some benefits. It's grounded my crazy mind. Because I mean,
Sure.
you'll find out yourself. When you leave the service eventually. One of the key things is really difficult to deal with is your mental escapism.
Yeah.
You find your white space becomes bigger because you're not thinking about what am I doing at work the next day and all that
Yeah.
sort of thing. That has become a little bit more prevalent over the last sort of like 6 to 9 months really, and I found that that's helped quite a bit. That and audiobooks. I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well.
Yeah,
But
that's a good. I think that's a good idea to do to have a not just for the routine sake, but just to kind of have it's like a winding down kind of. Literally, you're just kind of reflecting and yeah, just being aware of your, like you said, the breath work. That's a good idea, especially at the end. At the end of the day.
yeah. Do you watch much jiu-jitsu? Do you watch a lot of MMA or any of like the stuff on Flow Grappling? Are you into that?
Well, first of all, I try to. I like to watch it if I don't have to pay, and if one of our friends has the UFC Fight Pass, and they have a get together. I mean, it's for those kind of ones. It's more to like just get to hang out with friends as much as it is to watch the event. And I like to watch like the highlights. And if somebody, like I said, if somebody else is hosting something, I would go to watch it and just hang out. But I mean, I myself don't have any of the subscriptions of stuff. I don't know. I
So
kind
what
of
you're
like
trying to
it.
say is you're not a jiu-jitsu geek. That's what you're trying to say.
I enjoy thinking about the aspects of all what's happening and how each person is doing what they're trying to do versus what the other person is trying to do. I enjoy that piece of it. I don't know. I like that I don't have the, I'm not that much in intertwined with the thing because um, I don't know. I think it can go too much in one direction. And I think knowing my personality, it kind of I end up doing like an over investment a lot of times in a thing that I really like to do or I'm interested in. So I think to kind of modulate myself, I like it like where I can, like I said, if it's for free, I might watch it. I understand though, like from a casual fan's perspective, why it's very difficult sometimes to get people to watch a grappling match because if you don't do it, you don't have really a context of what's happening. And then and many times when there's two people who are even high level going against each other, it almost looks like nothing's happening. And to a person who has no context of anything, it looks boring, to be honest. Unless there's a lot of movement, right? Which is why people, I think, gravitate towards no gi so much, because you have less likelihood of two people just staying in a fixed position. And people don't understand jiu-jitsu, but they do understand two people moving around in relation to another person, which is why I feel like that's a little bit more transferable of a thing to appreciate. But maybe, man, it's just is you have two people, one person who's really good at takedowns and the other person who has good takedown defense. And if you have two people who once the engagement starts, then they're trying to not have the other person get any kind of advantage, and then they disengage when that engagement becomes in against their favor. It looks like two people are just not doing anything, right? And I think that's the hardest part about the sport is if it's going to be conveyable to a general audience, like how the goal is for a lot of promotions. That's not the way to. That's not the match to showcase, right? You don't want to showcase that one to people like, hey, this is jiu-jitsu. They're gonna be like, well, why would I watch that? Or the opposite example is two people who are grounding themselves at the same time, like two people who double guard pull, right? And it just doesn't look appealing. I think I can say that, right? I don't. If there's somebody like, well, if somebody disagrees with that, I think they're kind of in denial about what normal people who don't train find interesting. Like that does not relate to an average person when you see that, right? It's like, what is that? Like, what does that even? How does that even connect to like a real, to me? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, people don't understand how difficult it is to get into certain situations or certain positions and hold them to
Yeah,
slowly progress through. But again, that's down to the individual being a little bit, in denial about, what they're doing. And if they don't train it, then that they're not really going to understand it. A classic is classics the Khabib stuff where he used to take people down and he just slowly work up and pin
yeah,
them and maul them. people don't understand how difficult that is to do to
Yeah.
such high level people and make it look easy and smash the shit out of them at the same time. So yeah, it's kind of one of them. I can see why it's not appealing to some people. You know, I was one of those guys that was definitely I like to do and not to watch. That sounded quite sexual, didn't it? I didn't mean it that way. Um, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm the same boat, same way.
Right, we've been going about an hour, mate. I've got 5 questions here that I want to try and knock out nice and quick to you.
Sure.
And yeah, let's just see how you answer them, I guess. So, what's the best thing about being a cop?
Literally being able to save somebody's life and make like in that way.
What's the strangest thing about being a cop?
Um, your perspective of humanity drastically changes, so that the things that people see once in their life become normalized to you. And because it comes normalized to you, because you see it more often, your perspective about society and humanity will drastically change, which will make your interactions with normal, typical people weird sometimes, because your sense of humor will change, your context for what is funny will change. And then if you bring that outside of the realm of police work to normal, typical society, like in a party, people gonna think you crazy. Well,
Yeah.
that's that you have to remember. Like normal, typical people don't see stuff that is weird a lot, if ever, and you see it all the time. So your perspective on what is weird, funny, whatever, will be completely different, and you have to be mindful of that. Otherwise, you can get some weird responses or looks after you start sharing stuff.
Well, that's kind of why you call it dark humor, isn't it? You know, public service people are definitely a little bit. Their sense of humor is a lot darker than most people, and they don't get it.
Yep, 100%.
What's one of the most bizarre incidents you've attended or been part of?
A PG one that I can share, right? Like there was a there was a person who had a therapy pet that was a bird. There's all kind of animals, right? Dog, cat, everything, but bird, therapy pet bird. That the pet bird had the wings clipped, so they couldn't, fly away. But it can still, people, if you have, I don't know if you ever had seen a bird that has clipped wings, it can still fly, right? Just not for, it can like go from a countertop to a table and back and forth, but not for extended periods, right? But it can still go from one place to another point without walking. So the bird got away, and then it was able to go into a tree, you know, the tree that obviously the owner could not recover the bird from, and the bird didn't want to come down. So the response was, of course, the person, they wanted their pet bird back, and they just wasn't able to get it. So they called 911, and the emergency number to say, hey, my therapy pet bird is in a tree. Can So they send the fire department, right? They have the trucks with the ladder, and the tree is probably it's a big tree, and I'd say it's at least 10 feet, up in the air. I should say I'm going to use the metric system, but anyway, it's about the height of a basketball, at least that high, right? Basketball rim. So the person can't get it. So they bring the truck inside, and then they're doing with the ladder, and then with the ladder they having the person try to navigate to, because the bird doesn't want to. It's going to get a human contact. It's going to fly to another branch, and then on and on, right? So they're trying to deal with that, and while they're dealing with that, it's creating from the outside, you're looking at it, it's like what's going on here, right? There's a fire truck with a ladder in a tree, so people walking past this, right there, it's in a parking lot of a shopping center, so we had to kind of block so that people would not be able to drive through it, because it's a fire truck. And so I'm positioned on the outside of that, just kind of making sure people don't just drive in between. And then they're asking me like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, somebody's trying to get their pet. They assume this is what they asked me. They was like, oh, they see fire truck and a tree, and they go, well, it's like, is somebody's cat stuck up in there? And then I said, like, no, it's a bird. And they go, oh, okay. And then they have a look like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it's a bird, a pet bird stuck in a tree. And then just weird stuff like that happens once in a while, you know. I think it's kind of funny because when you look at that scene, it's like you're not envisioning an animal that has wings. That is the thing that this fire truck is trying to save. So
sounds like a good use of taxpayers' money as well.
Well, you know what? The thing is, like, if the fire truck, guess what? They'll probably ask us, like, hey, can the police get it? And then, you know, what do we even have that is, they would have to go to the pet store to buy a net, you know, to try. And then, I mean, there's no other thing left, right? The animal control, I guess they're going to try to contact them to facilitate it.
I don't know. You could play that game like when you were a kid. So something stuck up a tree, so you just get a rock and throw it at it. It's the first one to hit it at the tree.
Yeah, I don't know if the owner would have liked it for us throwing rocks at that bird, but I mean, we get called to things all the time that is like, why is the police getting called to this? And then the dispatchers try to kind of filter out some of the ones that, okay, no, we're not sending the police to that. But there's still some that we go to, it's like, we're not the right person we're not the right entity for this situation, but that's all there is left. You know, there's no other alternative. So sometimes we get to, like, I mean, yeah, I can think of a few more, but that's all right. Maybe next time.
What would you do if you weren't a cop?
That's a good question. I'd be working out in some way. I would be doing some kind of service-oriented job. I just feel like that's my nature. Like, that's what I would gravitate towards. So if I wasn't doing a job that had some kind of ability to provide some service to some piece of the community, I would probably hate that job and eventually quit it and do another job that has some kind of dynamic of it. Maybe so. Before I did this job, this field, I was working for 3 years as a behavioral aid, which that'd be like a one-on-one aid to teens that they're on the autism spectrum.
Well, that's because you got a degree in psychology, right?
I did, and that was one job that was able to utilize that degree, and I enjoyed it. I mean, that was great. That was actually great training for our job right now, because we deal with people who have varying kinds of mental health issues all the time, every day. And I mean, including autism. And yeah, I enjoyed work like that, where I could be able to engage with people in the community, especially if they needed some kind of support, some assistance. I don't know.
Awesome. Craig, Hanaumi, wow, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. And mate, keep doing what you're doing on socials, mate. You're absolutely rocking it. And it was a joy to talk to you today.
Well, thank you, Ads, for having me. I need to talk to somebody from, I don't know, we would probably be pretty close to halfway around the world from each other, right?
Yeah, it was an 8-hour time difference. So yeah, it's pretty much the other side of the planet.
That's very cool. One day, maybe hopefully we can train together somehow. And yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, give it 10 years. It'd be like, you know, virtual reality. We'll put some goggles on and we can try and strangle each other through the internet. I guess.
In 10 years, we might have teleportation.
Yeah, it'd be like Star Trek, where you could just teleport around the world then.
Right, exactly like that. Hopefully, crossing my fingers.
That'd be amazing. If we could do that, I'd be in Indonesia every other day.
Right. Me too.
Cheers, mate.
Okay, take care. See you later.
And that's it. If you're enjoying the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe on your podcast provider. Leave a little review on Apple Podcasts, and I will see you for the next episode in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for listening.